Welcome back to Tef's Travails, everyone. Today we are going to be having a look at a trip on DFDS ferries from Newhaven to Dieppe, which we took very recently, and I'll be giving you a talk through of what happened and a review of their service. Arrival at Newhaven was relatively straightforward for us, given it's not a big journey. However, you'll get there, you will go on the A259 for the very last part. If you're coming from the west, that is to say from the direction of Brighton, please be aware that there is a swing bridge in the middle of Newhaven, which might open for boats to pass through just when you don't need it to, so please do allow plenty of time. As you'll see, when we arrived there was almost no queue for check-in, which was very pleasing. And when we pulled up behind this rather strange looking vehicle in front of us, and were seen by the check-in agent within a minute or two. The procedure here is you pass your passports to the check-in agent, and they will issue you your boarding pass and tell you which lane to go in. Straight after that, you may get pulled into the shed on the left for a security check. We were not, and so we took our places in the queue for boarding the ferry. As you can see, we were amongst the last to check in, but once we'd done this, we still had a little bit of time to have a look around. That won't take you very long because there's not much to see. That building on the left, passenger waiting area, is all there is, and there's a couple of vending machines and some lavatories in there. That old bus, by the way, is what the foot passengers will take to get onto the ship. After a little bit of waiting, we were finally called forward and drove up to the vessel itself. The vessel in question today was the Cote Albatre, and although this is sold and marketed by DFDS, the ships themselves, there are two that operate this route, the Seven Sisters and the Cote Albatre, are still in the livery of the company that had them built back in the early 2000s. And I don't see any sign of DFDS changing that livery on board or outside the vessel anytime soon. Anyway, we were marshalled up the link span onto the vessel, and it was all relatively smooth so far. When we did get on board, we were held at the bottom of the ramp for a very short period to allow other vehicles to get off it. You do get a little bit of a view of the port as you go up the ramp, which is quite interesting because you don't often drive over the sea like that. And then we were aboard. Apologies, this is the dash cam on my car, so it's not the clearest of images at this time, but that will change. The member of the crew on the car deck there, and indeed all the crew that we had interactions with, were all French, but they all spoke good English, so I don't think anybody will have any problems with communication on board. Now back up the ramp, and you're marshalled by the staff on the car deck round to where you will be leaving your vehicle. Straight ahead of us is the stern ramps. Now this is important because if you end up marshalled to park where we were, you will end up in a bit of trouble, as you will see. What's interesting here is that we were not the last vehicles on by any means. There were still a couple of lanes behind us and the overheight vehicles as well, but this is where we were directed to leave the vehicle. And as you can see, we were at the very back of a queue of vehicles pointing towards the bow of the ship, and everyone else, including vehicles that came on behind us, were pointing towards the stern. So once we'd parked the car, we went up pretty much straight away up onto the deck at the stern of the ship, and just in time to see the lines being cast off and the ship moving underway. Now, apologies for the thumb over the lens, but it was extremely windy and I did not want to drop my phone in the sea. Now, if you head up those steps there, you'll get to the upper deck at the stern of the ship, which is a good place to get a good view of everything around you. As you can see from the flag and the amount of water up here, the weather was pretty poor, But do not let that put you off getting a good view of the commercial port of Newhaven, including that big pile of scrap metal for export. And that's just one of the things you can see as we head astern down to the mouth of the River Ouse. You get a good view up there of the historic Newhaven Fort, and also, quite bizarrely, straight into those people's living rooms. I'm sure they are very pleased that the ferry is back again. And you can see just out there the breakwater, and as we continue head astern towards that, the weather gets a little bit worse. And at one point, I'm sure I even felt some sleet coming in off the English Channel. So it probably was time to head back down. But just for your benefit, I braved it out. And of course, to get a good view there of the Seven Sisters and our final glimpse towards England as we head out further into the English Channel. That last clip I thought I'd put in because it was quite bizarre to see a whirlpool on a ship, but that was the rainwater finally draining down the scuppers due to the rolling of the ship in the wind, and proving that it really was time to go back inside. Now, when you get back down inside the ship, it's worth having a little look around to see what there is to occupy the next 4.5 hours of your life, effectively. This is the reception area, and interesting, it's got the old Transmanche livery still on the floor there. There's also a handy map of the ship showing you what you can do. You've effectively got 3 decks that you can use, one of which is the upper deck outside. There's also a handy little poster with information about the boat. My favourite, of course, is that it's powered by 2 Wärtsilä 9,500 kilowatt 4-stroke diesel engines. There's also a price list in the reception, which when I went to it was closed, unfortunately, showing the eclectic range of items that you can buy on board, some of which may be more useful than others. It's also worth noting there are cabins available for occupation during the voyage, which at certain times are quite reasonably priced, such as that large one top left for 30 quid, but they do go up very much more expensive during the night time, as you might imagine. I didn't go into any of those, so I haven't got any pictures of them, but here's a photo of their corridor. Next step for me was a bite to eat in the ship's cafeteria. Situated amidships, it was nice and clean, very tidy, and had some quite interesting views out of the windows. Here you see the ship's fast rescue boat doing its best impression of a wind turbine. The menu was pretty comprehensive, I have to say, and has some nice looking things on it. For not unreasonable prices, I have to say. Although I think a plate of chips for £3.60 would not do much for the Entente Cordiale. I plumped for the full English breakfast, which was pretty good, although it was cooked by Frenchmen. The only complaint is it didn't have any fried bread. So, after having a bit of breakfast, we headed back to the main saloon, which is at the rear of the ship. This is called the Saloon Flaubert, and it is a relatively comfortable place, nicely well lit, and actually has 2 levels. Upstairs is called the Bar Corneille. Don't forget to go up there and sample some of the Norman beers that are on offer. I actually quite like this area of the ship. It's nice and light. You can see through to both sides, and there's not a bad range of seating up there. This is the upper bar, the Bar Corneille, which I probably think is the best place to sit. However, if you, like us, were one of the last onto the boat, you will struggle to find any seating in this area. The bar is worth looking at. It's got some decent drinks in there. I settled for a pint of what they call the bitter, which is something unpronounceable and Norman, but was not unreasonably priced, I have to say. It is, however, 6%, so bear that in mind if it's nearly time to get back in the car. Don't forget to have a look for the pictures of the seashells on the central column. Fortunately, we didn't get close enough to have a look at them in real life. The big disappointment in this area, I think, is the so-called soft play area. We were looking forward to using that, especially as we were travelling with kids, but it's more padded sail than soft play. There is nothing in it at all, apart from some crash mats on the walls and sides, and is not really much use at all. More useful, I have to say, was the duty-free shop, which now, since Brexit, does actually come with duty-free prices, many of which were quite reasonable, although I don't think they're any more reasonable than the ones you would get on the Dover-Calais route, but the shop itself is relatively small, but you might still pick up a bargain. The other place to mention are these small saloons at the front of the ship. They're probably the quietest place to go if you want to get a bit of kip. The only other interior space on the ship is what's billed as the a la carte restaurant. It wasn't open when I visited, or at least it shouldn't have been, but I was able to get in from the outside deck because the door wasn't locked and there was no barrier across it, a situation that had been rectified on my return visit. However, once I got inside, I went down the stairs into the cafeteria and was met with incredulity from a member of staff there, who questioned how I was able to get in, and seemed surprised and also nonplussed that the door upstairs hadn't been locked. Now, it looks to me like this place has seen very much better days. Some of the tables are cracked and broken, and the place has a general air of neglect about it, which is a shame because it could be nice to have an a la carte menu on board a French ship. There's also a strange captain's table in one corner of it, and it does look like it maybe not be open because at the time of year maybe there's not the traffic to warrant it. Who knows? It'll be good to hear from DFDS on what this place is and what they intend to do with it. Now, speaking of things not being in great shape, I thought I'd just say a few words about the general condition of the vessel, because this is something that does get brought up in reviews by people who've travelled on this service. There were quite a few things where the vessel was showing its age, such as these seats and such as various signs up around the ship saying that some things were out of order or not working. And whilst I do not make a habit of spending time taking photographs in gents' toilets, I've done it on this occasion so that you don't have to. The particular cubicle that I went in, both the seat and the lock were not working. Now, that's not really good enough, let's be honest on that. So I think DFDS, you do have a couple of things to look after on these ships.
Next 6, near the electronic gates, and wait for their disembarkation announcement. The captain, the officers, and the crew of the Cote Albatre would like to thank you for traveling with Transmanche ferries operated by DFDS, and we hope to welcome you on board in the near future. Thank you.
Arriving into Dieppe felt like a slightly laborious process. This is likely due to the fact that we went stern in, so everything took a little bit longer. Added to that is the kicker that came from the fact that we were parked at the back of a queue on the car deck. This meant that we were pretty much the last vehicle off. The effect of that meant that we were pretty much the last vehicle through the French immigration. Now, the French were doing their best, and I counted how long it took them to do each car, and it averaged around 20 to 30 seconds. So nobody can suggest that they were on a go slow, or that they were trying to punish the Brits for Brexit, or any nonsense like that. It's just that we were at the end of the queue. And just a note on French immigration procedures, and the same ones back in the UK. Unlike on the Dover-Calais route, there are no juxtaposed controls. That is to say that you go through French immigration in France and British immigration in the UK. All in all, it took us approximately an hour to get clear of the ferry and onto the French road network. Now, that could be a problem if you got some distance to go across Europe. Fortunately, we didn't, so it was just mildly inconvenient. Now, the journey back to Newhaven was relatively uneventful, except for the fact we were around 20 minutes late departing Dieppe because the bunkering operation was still underway. That is to say, refuelling. This small tanker was moored up alongside our starboard side, refueling the ship via a large hose. This took a little bit longer than expected, so we were slightly late leaving. I don't actually know if we were late arriving into Newhaven because it didn't seem to bother me that much. Once again, there was plenty to see in Newhaven's busy commercial port, including this small bulk carrier that was making light work of that large pile of scrap metal we saw on the way out. Ah, so that's where I parked my Nissan Micra.
Depuis des passagers motorisés. Nous prions donc tous les passagers piétons de se rendre à la réception à l'avant-service afin d'attendre la visite des incidents Albatre.
Disembarking at Newhaven was nothing like as bad as on the way out. We were about halfway down the queue of cars, so that we got to the UK border in relatively good time. It was a simple matter of presenting your passports there, and once again they weren't mucking about and only took 30 to 40 seconds per vehicle. From there you're straight into the customs shed at Newhaven, and whilst I didn't see anybody being pulled over, there were customs officers on duty looking at each vehicle. It's worth having a look now at the duty-free allowances, and bearing in mind that these are per person. So if you've got a car full of 5 adults, you can bring in a relatively large amount of booze. So the next time the local branch of Alcoholics Anonymous ask you to drive their minibus for their annual day out to Lord's, it's probably worth taking them up on the offer. Now you may remember about 15 minutes ago I told you about a swing bridge on the A259 in Newhaven. Now, it didn't cause us any problems on the way into the port, but the way out was a different story. Immediately after leaving the border control and the customs shed, I noticed this vessel making its way up the River Ouse. I knew exactly what was going to happen next, and lo and behold, it did. As soon as we left the port, we hit heavy traffic, and the bridge had opened to allow this vessel to go up river. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because if you have cut it fine on your way into the port, you may find yourself on the wrong side of the river with the spring bridge open for 10 or 15 minutes, in which case you'd find yourself up the River Ouse without a paddle. So, on to the review. What did I think of this service? Well, with the help of my no expense spent laser display board, we'll now find out. I thought the service was very convenient indeed. That's mainly because of where we're located, and obviously that's going to be different for everyone, but in terms of an alternative to Dover-Calais, I thought it was brilliant. Value for money, I can't remember exactly how much we paid for this, but the fact that I can't remember suggests it wasn't eye-wateringly expensive, so again, it scores on value. Catering, the food that we had was good, and I would have it again. Facilities, now this is where DFDS does need to do some improvement. Some things were broken on board the ship, some things were pretty worn out, and the state of those toilets, in terms of the things that weren't working, was not acceptable. The crew were helpful and spoke good standards of English. That's all you want, really. Kids, well, they are not well catered for on this boat, so they get a negative on this front. The soft play that was advertised is really anything but. And finally, the a la carte restaurant. Well, I just really want to know what's going on with that. Overall, I am a satisfied customer. I would use this product again, and I would recommend this service to other people. I will put these points to DFDS and see if they answer and see what they say. But thanks for watching, and I recommend the Newhaven-Dieppe ferry on DFDS to you. Goodbye.